"You're embarrassing us. Just stay in the back, behind the flower arrangements where the guests won't see you. And for God's sake, don't talk to anyone important. We can't have you making our family look bad at Andrea's wedding." My stepmother Patricia's voice was low and sharp, her manicured hand physically steering me away from the main seating area at my cousin Andrea's extravagant wedding reception. The ballroom of the five-star hotel glittered with crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral displays, and designer-clad guests who represented the wealthy. Connected social circle my father's family had cultivated over decades, and there I stood in my simple Navy service uniform, the one acceptable formal attire option for active-duty military personnel, being shoved toward the shadows like a shameful secret Patricia needed to hide. I didn't argue. I just nodded politely, picked up my clutch, and walked to the back corner of the ballroom where she'd indicated, finding a small table partially obscured by an enormous arrangement of white roses and hydrangeas. From here I could see the celebration, but wasn't visible to most of the guests. Exactly what Patricia wanted, but what Patricia didn't know. What none of my family knew, because they'd never bothered to ask about my career or my life, was that in approximately 47 minutes, a military helicopter was going to land on this hotel's rooftop helipad, and my commanding officer was going to walk into this ballroom looking specifically for me. And when that happened, every single person who'd treated me like an embarrassment was going to understand exactly how badly they'd misjudged who I was and what I'd become. My name is Lieutenant Commander Riley Hayes, United States Navy. I'm 29 years old, and I've spent the past 11 years building a military career that's taken me from enlisted sailor to officer, from classroom to combat zones, from someone my family barely acknowledged, to someone whose expertise is requested by flag officers and whose security clearance is higher than most people know exists. But to my family, to Patricia and my father and my cousins and everyone at this wedding, I'm just Riley, the awkward stepdaughter, the one who couldn't hack it in civilian life and ran away to the military because I didn't have better options. The embarrassment they tolerate at family events but never actually include in anything meaningful. What they don't know could fill volumes. But before I tell you what happened when my commanding officer walked into that ballroom and called my name in front of 300 guests who'd watched Patricia shove me into a corner, you need to understand how I got here. How I went from being the overlooked stepdaughter to being someone whose presence is requested by the Department of Defense, and why this particular wedding was about to become a memory my family would never forget. My mother died when I was 8 years old. Cancer, fast and merciless, taking her from healthy to gone in less than 18 months. My father, devastated and unable to cope with single parenthood while managing his law practice, remarried within 2 years. Patricia was a widow with a daughter named Andrea who was my age, and on paper it seemed like a practical solution. 2 incomplete families becoming whole. The reality was far less heartwarming. Patricia had married my father for his money and social standing, not out of any affection for him, and certainly not out of any maternal feelings toward me. From day one, she made it clear that I was an obligation she'd accepted to secure the life she wanted, not a child she intended to actually parent. Andrea was her golden child, her precious daughter who deserved everything beautiful and expensive and perfect. I was the reminder that my father had a whole life before Patricia, an inconvenience she managed through strategic neglect and systematic exclusion. My father, consumed by grief and work, either didn't see the dynamic or chose not to see it. When Patricia enrolled Andrea in expensive private schools while sending me to public school, he accepted her explanations about different learning needs. When Patricia threw elaborate birthday parties for Andrea while giving me grocery store cake and a card, he didn't notice the disparity. When Patricia introduced Andrea as my daughter, but me as David's daughter at social events, he wasn't present to hear the distinction. The favoritism shaped my entire childhood. Andrea got piano lessons, dance classes, summer camps in Europe, a car at 16, designer clothes, and constant validation. I got hand-me-downs, public transportation, after-school jobs to pay for anything beyond basics, and a clear message that I was less important, less valued, less deserving of investment or attention. But here's what Patricia's systematic neglect accidentally gave me: independence, resilience, and a burning determination to prove I didn't need her approval or her resources to build something meaningful with my life. At 17, facing the reality that my family had no intention of helping pay for college and that student loans would bury me in debt, I made a decision that shocked everyone. I enlisted in the Navy. Not because I dreamed of military service, but because I saw it as a strategic path to education, purpose, and most importantly, complete independence from a family that had made it clear I didn't really belong. Patricia's reaction was predictably dismissive. Well, I suppose the military takes anyone. It's better than nothing, and at least you won't be asking us for money anymore. My father had been vaguely supportive. In that distant way, he approached everything related to me, proud enough to mention it to colleagues but not engaged, enough to actually attend my boot camp graduation. Andrea had laughed and told her friends I was too dumb for real college, so I had to join the military instead. The fact that I'd scored in the 97th percentile on the ASVAB and qualified for virtually any rate in the Navy didn't matter to them because they'd never asked about my scores or qualifications. They'd simply assumed I was mediocre and built their narrative around that assumption. I shipped out to boot camp 3 days after graduating high school, and I never looked back. The military was hard, physically demanding, mentally exhausting, deliberately designed to break you down and rebuild you into something stronger. But it was also fair in ways my family had never been. My performance mattered more than my background. My dedication was rewarded with advancement. My intelligence was recognized and cultivated rather than dismissed. Nobody cared that I was a stepdaughter who'd been treated as less than my entire childhood. They only cared whether I could do the job. I could do the job. I excelled at it. I'd enlisted in the intelligence specialist rating, the Navy's version of intelligence analyst, because I'd always been good at patterns, puzzles, connecting disparate pieces of information into coherent pictures. I went through the training pipeline, earned my security clearances, and was assigned to a carrier battle group where I analyzed threats and provided intelligence support for combat operations. I was good at it. Really good. Good enough that I was recommended for officer programs after just 3 years enlisted. Good enough that the Navy paid for me to finish my bachelor's degree while I continued working. Good enough that I was selected for officer candidate school and commissioned as an ensign at 23 years old. My family didn't attend my commissioning ceremony. I'd sent invitations, but Patricia had said they couldn't make it because Andrea had a charity gala that same weekend that was much more important for family social connections. My father had apologized vaguely and said he'd make the next one. There wouldn't be a next commissioning ceremony, but he didn't understand military milestones well enough to know that. I'd stood on that parade ground with my officer candidate class, feeling proud and accomplished and successful, and also feeling a familiar ache that the people who were supposed to celebrate these moments with me couldn't be bothered to show up. But I'd learned to compartmentalize that pain and focus on the people who did show up. My Navy family, my mentors, my fellow officers who understood what this achievement meant. After commissioning, my career accelerated. I specialized in signals intelligence and cyber operations, working on increasingly classified projects that I couldn't discuss with anyone outside specific secure channels. I deployed multiple times to combat zones and sensitive locations. I earned commendations for my analytical work that contributed to successful operations. I was promoted ahead of my peers, ensign to lieutenant junior grade ahead of schedule, then lieutenant commander at just 28 years old. Lieutenant commander is an 04 rank, equivalent to a major in the Army or Marines. It's the rank where you transition from junior officer to mid-level leadership, where you're trusted with significant responsibility and authority. Most officers take 10 to 12 years to reach 04. I'd made it in 7 through consistently exceptional performance, but my family had no idea. They knew I was in the Navy and that I did something with computers, but they'd never asked for details, and I'd stopped volunteering information to people who clearly didn't value it. Why share my achievements with people who demonstrated for decades that they didn't consider those achievements worthy of celebration? I maintained minimal contact, obligatory appearances at major family events, surface-level phone calls for holidays, polite but distant relationships that required nothing from me emotionally. And my family filled in the gaps with their own assumptions. That I was probably mediocre in my career, that I probably struggled financially on government salary, that I probably regretted not going to real college and pursuing something more impressive. They had no idea I'd finished a master's degree in cybersecurity that the Navy had fully funded. They had no idea I held multiple security clearances and had access to classified information that shaped national security decisions. They had no idea I'd briefed admirals and assisted in operations that had strategic importance. They had no idea my salary and benefits package was actually quite comfortable, especially considering I had no student debt and had been investing aggressively since I was 21. They didn't know because they'd never cared to know. And I'd stopped trying to make them care, which brings us to Andrea's wedding. My cousin, my stepsister, technically, though we'd never been close, was marrying Jonathan, the son of a prominent real estate developer. The wedding was exactly what you'd expect: extravagant, expensive, designed to impress rather than to celebrate anything genuine. 300 guests, designer everything, a venue that probably cost more than most people's houses. I'd been invited with a +1, but I'd declined to bring anyone because I knew how my family would treat any guest I brought. The invitation had come with a note from Patricia. "We're having a formal dress code. Please dress appropriately and try not to draw attention to yourself. This is Andrea's special day." The implication was clear. Don't embarrass us, Riley. Blend into the background. Be present because family obligation requires it. But don't be visible enough to remind anyone that you exist. I'd worn my service dress blues, the formal Navy uniform that's equivalent to a business suit or evening wear. It's an authorized and appropriate choice for active-duty military attending formal events. It's also distinctive and visible in ways Patricia clearly hadn't anticipated when she'd sent her passive-aggressive note about dress codes. I'd arrived at the wedding ceremony alone, sat in the back row, watched Andrea marry Jonathan in a ceremony that was beautiful in the way expensive things often are. Impressive, but ultimately soulless. During the reception cocktail hour, I'd tried to make polite conversation with various relatives who barely remembered who I was and seemed confused about why I was in uniform. "Are you in the military?" one aunt had asked, as if we hadn't met at multiple family events over the past decade. "Yes, I'm in the Navy," I'd replied politely. "Oh, that's nice. What do you do?" "I'm an intelligence officer." "How interesting," she'd said in a tone that clearly meant she found it neither interesting nor worthy of follow-up questions. Then she'd moved on to talk to someone more important. That interaction had been repeated a dozen times with various relatives, all of whom seemed to have forgotten I existed between family events, and none of whom showed any genuine interest in my life or career. It was familiar and expected, and I'd long since stopped being hurt by their disinterest. But then Patricia had spotted me during the reception grand entrance, seen me standing near the main seating area in my highly visible Navy uniform, and decided I was too prominent, too noticeable, too much of a potential embarrassment. So she'd physically steered me to the back corner, told me to hide behind flowers, and warned me not to talk to anyone important. I'd complied without argument because causing a scene at Andrea's wedding served no purpose. I found my assigned table, table 23, far from the family tables, positioned near the service entrance where staff brought food from the kitchen, and settled in to eat dinner alone while watching the celebration from a distance. The irony was almost funny. Patricia was trying so hard to hide me from important guests, worried I'd somehow embarrass the family by being visible. What she didn't know was that in less than an hour, I was going to become the center of attention in a way that would make hiding impossible and would force everyone in this ballroom to reconsider every assumption they'd made about who I was, because 47 minutes before I'd arrived at this wedding, my commanding officer had called with an urgent tasking. A situation had developed that required my specific expertise, and I was being recalled from leave immediately. There was a helicopter being dispatched to pick me up from the nearest suitable landing zone, which happened to be the rooftop helipad of this exact hotel, approved for emergency medical evacuations and apparently emergency military personnel retrieval. I'd confirmed I'd be ready for extraction, calculated estimated arrival time based on the helicopter's departure point, and realized with dark amusement that the timing meant the pickup would happen right in the middle of Andrea's reception. I'd briefly considered leaving early to avoid the scene, but I'd decided against it. If my family wanted to treat me like an embarrassment, they could deal with the reality of who I actually was being revealed in the most public, undeniable way possible. So I'd come to the wedding knowing exactly how the evening was going to unfold. I'd worn my uniform because it was appropriate, and because it would make me easy to identify when my commanding officer arrived. I'd let Patricia shove me to the back without arguing, because it didn't matter where I was sitting. When that helicopter landed and an officer in dress uniform walked into this ballroom looking for me, everyone was going to notice regardless of where I'd been positioned. I checked my watch. 23 minutes until estimated arrival. I picked at my dinner, expensive food that I couldn't really taste because of the adrenaline starting to build, and watched my family celebrate Andrea's wedding without giving me a second thought. Patricia was holding court at the main family table, laughing with important guests, basking in the reflected glory of her daughter's impressive marriage. My father was making small talk with the groom's family, playing the proud father role while having no idea where I was sitting or whether I was okay. Andrea was glowing in her designer wedding dress, dancing with her new husband, enjoying her perfect day. None of them looked in my direction. None of them noticed I'd been segregated to the equivalent of a kids' table for adults they didn't want to deal with. None of them cared, but in 20 minutes that was all going to change. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to my commanding officer. At the venue. Ready for extraction when you arrive. Fair warning, this is going to make a scene. Family event that's about to get interesting. Her response came back immediately. Understood. Try not to enjoy it too much, Hayes. This is official business, not personal vindication. Of course, ma'am, I replied, knowing she could probably hear the smile in my text. Purely professional, sure it is. See you in 18 minutes. I tucked my phone away and took a sip of water, watching the celebration continue around me while I waited for the moment that would shatter their comfortable assumptions about who I was and what I'd become despite everything they'd done to dismiss me. Sometimes vindication isn't about revenge. Sometimes it's just about the truth finally becoming impossible to ignore. And sometimes that truth arrives in a Navy helicopter with your commanding officer looking for you specifically because your expertise is needed for national security operations. Stay with me, because what happened when Commander Sarah Chen walked into that ballroom in full dress, uniform, and asked for me by my rank and name is going to show you exactly why you should never underestimate someone just because they're quiet about their accomplishments. The first sign that something unusual was happening came at 7:47 p.m., exactly on schedule. The distinctive sound of helicopter rotors began to fill the air outside the ballroom. Not overwhelming at first, but growing steadily louder, impossible to ignore. Conversations faltered mid-sentence. Dancers on the floor paused. The band continued playing, but people had stopped paying attention to the music, looking around in confusion and concern. Is that a helicopter? Someone asked loudly enough to be heard across multiple tables. The sound grew closer, louder, until it was obvious the helicopter was descending toward the building rather than simply passing overhead. Several guests moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows to look out, their confused voices rising in volume as they tried to understand what was happening. It's landing on the roof, someone called out. There's a helicopter landing on the hotel roof. The music stopped entirely now. The whole ballroom was focused on the sound overhead. The rumble of rotors touching down on the helipad above us, the unmistakable presence of something official and urgent interrupting this carefully planned celebration. Patricia looked furious. Her daughter's perfect wedding was being disrupted by some kind of emergency situation, and she was clearly preparing to demand someone fix it immediately. My father looked confused but curious. Andrea looked annoyed that attention had shifted away from her special day. The guests were pulling out phones, some of them probably already posting on social media about the unexpected drama at this wedding. And I sat calmly at my back corner table, watching it all unfold, knowing exactly what was about to happen next. The ballroom doors opened, and Commander Sarah Chen walked in. She was in full dress blues, the Navy's most formal uniform, dark navy jacket with gold buttons, ribbons indicating her commendations and service awards, shoulder boards showing her '05 rank of commander. She was 42 years old, intimidating in the best way, and one of the most brilliant intelligence officers I'd ever worked with. She scanned the ballroom with professional efficiency, her eyes moving past confused guests and elaborate decorations, searching for someone specific. Behind her, a lieutenant in similar dress uniform followed, my colleague James Rodriguez, who I'd worked with on multiple operations and who was apparently serving as her escort for this retrieval. The entire ballroom had gone silent now. 300 guests watching these unexpected military visitors with fascination and concern. Patricia had stood up from the family table, already moving toward Commander Chen with the clear intention of demanding to know what was happening and why this interruption was occurring at her daughter's wedding. But before Patricia could reach her, Commander Chen's eyes found me at my corner table, partially hidden behind flowers. She nodded once in recognition, then walked directly toward me, her dress shoes clicking authoritatively on the marble floor, the crowd parting to let her through. Patricia intercepted her halfway across the ballroom. "Excuse me, what is the meaning of this? This is a private wedding reception, and you're disrupting—" "Ma'am, I'm Commander Sarah Chen, United States Navy," Chen said crisply, not slowing her stride. "I'm here on official business to retrieve one of my officers who's being recalled from leave for an urgent operational tasking. If you'll excuse me." She moved past Patricia, who stood frozen in shock, and continued walking directly toward me. I stood up from my table as she approached, coming to attention in proper military bearing. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes," Commander Chen said clearly, her voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "I apologize for interrupting your leave, but the situation we discussed has escalated. Your specific expertise is needed immediately. The helicopter is standing by on the roof for transport to base." "Understood, ma'am." "Grab your things and we'll proceed to the helipad." I picked up my clutch, which contained my ID, phone, and nothing else since I'd anticipated traveling light, and moved to follow Commander Chen back toward the exit. But Patricia had recovered from her shock enough to process what she'd just heard. "Wait, Lieutenant Commander? Riley, what is she talking about? You're a Lieutenant Commander?" I paused and turned to face her, very aware that every single person in the ballroom was watching this interaction. "Yes, Patricia. I've been a Lieutenant Commander for 8 months. Before that, I was a lieutenant for 3 years, and before that, a lieutenant junior grade. I've been an officer in the Navy for 6 years, and enlisted for 5 years before that. But we didn't know. You never told us you were an officer." Her voice had gone slightly shrill with confusion and embarrassment. "You never asked," I said simply. "You knew I was in the Navy. You never showed any interest in learning about my rank or my position or what I actually do. You just assumed I was mediocre and unimportant, and I stopped correcting your assumptions because you clearly didn't value the information." My father had pushed through the crowd now, staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Riley, you're a lieutenant commander? That's a significant rank, isn't it? Why didn't you tell us? Dad, I've sent you updates about my promotions and my assignments for years. You never responded to them or asked follow-up questions. I invited you to my commissioning ceremony when I became an officer. You said you were too busy with work. I invited you to my promotion to lieutenant. You forgot to come. I stopped inviting you to things after that because it was clear you weren't interested. You knew I was in the Navy. You chose not to know anything else. But what do you do?" Andrea had joined the family confrontation now, looking baffled and slightly angry that I'd somehow stolen attention from her wedding day. "You said you work with computers or something." "I'm an intelligence officer specializing in signals intelligence and cyber operations," I explained, keeping my voice even and professional despite the audience. "I analyze classified information, provide intelligence support for combat operations, work on cyber defense initiatives, and brief senior leadership on national security threats. I hold multiple security clearances and have deployed to combat zones and other sensitive locations on 4 separate occasions. I've received 3 Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medals, 2 Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medals, and various other awards for my work. But you've never asked about any of that, so you've never known." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 300 guests were witnessing this revelation, many of them probably recording it on their phones, all of them realizing that the woman Patricia had shoved to a back corner as an embarrassment was actually accomplished and impressive in ways none of them had understood. Commander Chen cleared her throat. "Lieutenant Commander Hayes, I don't mean to rush you, but we do need to depart. The helicopter pilot wants to get airborne before weather conditions deteriorate." "Of course, ma'am. I'm ready." I turned back to my family one last time. Andrea, congratulations on your wedding. I hope you and Jonathan are very happy together. Dad, Patricia, I'll be out of contact for a while, but I'll reach out when I'm back stateside. Enjoy the rest of your evening. I started to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. Riley, wait. When will you be back? Where are you going? Is this dangerous? I can't discuss where I'm going or what I'm doing, Dad. That's what classified means. I'll be back when the operation is complete, which could be days or weeks or months depending on how the situation develops. And yes, sometimes my work involves risk, but that's part of the job I chose. You take care of yourself, but we should talk about this, about your career and your rank and everything we didn't know. We need to... Respectfully, Dad, we've had 11 years to talk about my career. You chose not to have those conversations. I don't have time for them now because I have a job to do. We can talk when I'm back if you're genuinely interested. But right now, I need to go. I walked toward the exit with Commander Chen and Lieutenant Rodriguez, very aware of the stunned silence I was leaving behind. As we reached the ballroom doors, I heard the whispers starting, guests asking each other what had just happened, wondering who I actually was, speculating about what kind of operation required a helicopter extraction from a wedding reception. We took the service elevator to the roof access. Commander Chen remained professional, but I could see the slight smile at the corners of her mouth. That was quite a scene down there, Hayes. Your family seemed surprised by your rank. They've never been interested in my career, ma'am. Tonight was the first time they've had to confront the reality of what I actually do versus what they assumed I was doing. I gathered as much from the woman who tried to stop me. Was that your stepmother? Yes, ma'am. She spent my entire life treating me like an embarrassment and an inconvenience. She literally shoved me to a back corner tonight because my presence in uniform might make the family look bad to their wealthy friends. How's that working out for her? Rodriguez asked with a grin. About as well as you'd expect, I replied, allowing myself a small smile. I imagine she's having an interesting evening explaining to her social circle why her embarrassing stepdaughter is actually a lieutenant commander being retrieved for classified operations. We emerged onto the rooftop where an MH-60S Seahawk was waiting, rotors already spinning, the crew chief standing ready to help us aboard. The city lights spread out below us, beautiful and distant. Inside that ballroom, my family was probably still processing what had happened, what they'd learned, what assumptions had been shattered. I climbed into the helicopter, strapped in, put on my headset. Commander Chen settled in beside me, Rodriguez across from us. The crew chief secured the door and gave the pilot a thumbs up. As we lifted off, I could see the hotel falling away below us, the rooftop, the ballroom windows, the world where my family had just been forced to reckon with who I actually was. But almost immediately my mind shifted into operational mode, focusing on the briefing Commander Chen would give me during the flight, on the mission ahead, on the work that had made me someone worth retrieving via helicopter from a family wedding. All right. Hayes, Commander Chen said through the headset once we were airborne. Here's the situation we're dealing with. 3 days ago, we detected unusual signals. Traffic originating from a network. We've been monitoring for 18 months. She briefed me for the next 30 minutes as we flew toward base. Details I can't share, but which involved the kind of complex signals, intelligence analysis I'd specialized in, the kind of work that required specific expertise and experience, the kind of operations that had real strategic importance, even if they'd never make the news. This was who I was now. Not the overlooked stepdaughter, not the embarrassment Patricia tried to hide, but Lieutenant Commander Riley Hayes, trusted with classified operations, recalled from leave because my expertise mattered to national security, living a life of purpose and meaning that my family had never bothered to understand. By the time we landed at base 90 minutes later, I'd fully transitioned out of family event Riley and into operational Riley. I hit the ground ready to work, following Commander Chen into the secure facility where our operations center was located, where analysts were already assembled and waiting for the additional insight I'd been brought in to provide. I worked for 16 straight hours that night, analyzing data, identifying patterns, briefing senior leadership on our findings, supporting an operation that successfully neutralized a threat before it could develop into something worse. It was exhausting and intense, and exactly the kind of work I'd trained for, exactly the reason I'd been recalled, exactly why my expertise was valued. At 0400, Commander Chen found me still at my workstation, reviewing one more data set before I crashed. Go get some sleep, Hayes. You've done excellent work tonight, but you're no use to anyone if you're too tired to think clearly. Yes, ma'am. Just want to finish this analysis. That's an order, Lieutenant Commander. Sleep. The analysis will still be here in 6 hours. I smiled tiredly. Aye, ma'am. I made my way to temporary quarters, collapsed onto a rack still wearing my uniform minus shoes, and was asleep within minutes. When I woke up 8 hours later to dozens of missed calls and text messages from family members demanding explanations, demanding details, demanding that I call them back immediately, I deleted them all without responding. They'd had 11 years to ask about my life. They'd chosen not to. I wasn't obligated to explain myself now, just because they'd been publicly embarrassed by their own ignorance of who I'd become. But the fallout from that wedding, the messages from relatives, the social media posts I'd see later, the shifting dynamics in my family, that was all still to come. For now, I had work to do, an operation to support, and a mission that actually mattered more than their belated curiosity about my career. If you're still watching, you probably want to know what happened next with my family, how they reacted, what they said, whether this changed anything between us. Stay tuned, because the next few weeks brought revelations and reckonings that forced all of us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for over a decade. The operation I'd been recalled for lasted 6 days. 6 days of 12-hour shifts analyzing intelligence, briefing commanders, supporting active operations in a classified theater I couldn't discuss, and proving once again why my specific expertise was valued enough to justify helicopter extraction from family events. During those 6 days, my phone lit up constantly with messages from my family, texts, voicemails, missed calls, increasingly frantic attempts to reach me that I ignored entirely because I was working in secure spaces where personal phones weren't permitted, and because, honestly, I had no interest in engaging with their sudden curiosity about my life. On day 7, after the operation concluded successfully and I'd been released back to regular duty, I finally sat down in my quarters and reviewed the accumulated messages. There were 47 texts from various family members, 19 voicemails, and several emails. The content followed predictable patterns. From Patricia. Riley, we need to talk about what happened at the wedding. You made us look foolish in front of all our friends and Andrea's in-laws. You should have told us you were some kind of high-ranking officer instead of letting us find out that way. Call me immediately. The implication that I'd somehow wronged her by not advertising my rank was almost funny, as if it was my responsibility to force information on people who'd demonstrated zero interest in my life for over a decade. From my father. Riley, please call me. Your stepmother is very upset about what happened at the wedding. I had no idea you'd advanced so far in your career, or that you were doing such important work. I'm proud of you, but we need to discuss this situation. Call me when you can. At least he'd managed to say he was proud, even if it came packaged with demands that I manage Patricia's feelings about her own embarrassment. From Andrea. Seriously, Riley, you couldn't have mentioned you're actually important instead of letting Mom make a scene about hiding you? You completely overshadowed my wedding, and now everyone is talking about you instead of me and Jonathan. Thanks a lot. The entitlement in her message was breathtaking, as if my career and the urgent, operational tasking that required my recall were somehow about her wedding day rather than about national security, from various aunts, uncles, and cousins. Variations on, we had no idea you were so accomplished. And why didn't you tell us you were such a high-ranking officer? And we're so proud of you. We always knew you'd do well. The last one was particularly galling from relatives who'd barely acknowledged my existence at family events for years. I sat with the messages for a while, processing my reaction to them. Part of me wanted to respond with detailed explanations of every time I'd tried to share my career milestones and been dismissed or ignored. Part of me wanted to draft cutting responses about how their ignorance of my accomplishments was entirely their own fault. Part of me wanted to ignore them all entirely and let their messages go unanswered indefinitely. But mostly I felt tired. Tired of managing other people's emotions about their own failures. Tired of being expected to fix relationships that other people had broken through their consistent disinterest in my life. Tired of being treated as an obligation rather than a valued family member. I called my grandmother, my mother's mother, who lived across the country, and who'd been the one consistent source of support and unconditional love throughout my childhood and military career. She'd watched the wedding drama unfold in real time because Andrea had made the ceremony available via live stream for distant relatives, and apparently the helicopter incident had also been captured and shared on social media. "Riley," Grandma Alice answered on the first ring. "I've been hoping you'd call when you had a chance. That was quite an exit from Andrea's wedding, sweetheart. Are you okay? Is your operation complete?" "The operation's done, Grandma." "I'm fine. Just dealing with the aftermath of my suddenly realizing like you didn't try to tell them for years." "Riley, I've heard you talk about your promotions and deployments and achievements every time we've spoken. You've never hidden your career. They've just never bothered to listen." "I know. But now Patricia is upset that she was embarrassed. And Dad is confused about how he missed everything. And Andrea is mad that I overshadowed her wedding. And everyone wants me to call and explain myself like I owe them explanations for their own failure to pay attention to my life." "You don't owe them anything," Grandma Alice said firmly. "What you owe yourself is to set boundaries with people who've demonstrated they don't value you unless your accomplishments benefit them somehow. Riley, they've treated you as an afterthought your entire life. The only reason they're interested now is because you were publicly revealed to be impressive, and that embarrassed them in front of their social circle. Don't let them make this about you failing to advertise your achievements. This is about them failing to value you regardless of your achievements." She was right, of course, but knowing she was right didn't make it easier to figure out how to actually respond to my family's barrage of messages. "What should I do, Grandma? Ignore them? Respond and set boundaries? Try to rebuild relationships that have always been one-sided. What do you want to do?" she asked. "Not what you think you should do? Not what would be most polite or most likely to keep the peace? What do you actually want?" I thought about that carefully. I want them to understand how much they've missed and how much that's hurt me over the years. I want them to acknowledge that their ignorance about my career is their own fault, not mine. I want them to recognize that I've become successful and accomplished despite their complete lack of support, not because of anything they contributed. And honestly, I want them to feel bad about treating me like an embarrassment when I was actually someone worth being proud of all along. Those are all reasonable things to want, Grandma Alice said. The question is whether they're capable of giving you those things. Some people aren't capable of real self-reflection or genuine accountability. They'll apologize in ways that make themselves the victim, or that minimize their role in hurting you. They'll want to move forward without actually addressing the past. They'll expect you to manage their feelings about their own failures. Can your father and Patricia do better than that? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to give them the chance. Part of me thinks any chance I give them will just result in more hurt and disappointment. Then my advice is this: protect yourself first. If you decide to engage with them, do it on your terms with clear boundaries. Don't let them manipulate you into making their embarrassment your problem. Don't accept non-apologies that put the blame on you for not forcing them to pay attention. And don't feel obligated to rebuild relationships with people who've consistently demonstrated they're not capable of valuing you properly. We talked for another hour about the operation. I could vaguely describe about my career goals, about her health and her garden and normal grandparent-grandchild conversation that had nothing to do with the drama at Andrea's wedding. By the time we ended the call, I felt more centered and clear about what I needed to do. I crafted a single response message that I sent to my father, Patricia and Andrea. I've received your messages. I understand you're surprised about my rank and career, but your surprise is the result of years of not asking questions about my life or showing interest in my military service beyond surface-level acknowledgement that I'm in the Navy. I've sent updates about promotions, assignments, and achievements throughout my career. You chose not to engage with that information. Patricia, I did not make you look foolish at the wedding. Your own assumptions about who I am and what I do made you look foolish when they were revealed to be incorrect. I wore an appropriate uniform to a formal event and responded professionally when my commanding officer arrived to recall me for an urgent operation. How you chose to position me at the wedding as someone to hide and dismiss is entirely your responsibility, not mine. Andrea, I did not overshadow your wedding on purpose. I didn't control when I was recalled from leave, or where my commanding officer found me. If people are talking about what happened, that's because it was unusual and dramatic, not because I orchestrated it to take attention from you. Dad, I'm willing to talk when I have time and emotional energy for that conversation. But I need you to understand that I'm not interested in having a relationship where you're suddenly engaged with my life because you were embarrassed by not knowing about my career. I'm interested in genuine engagement where you value me as a person regardless of my rank or achievements. If you're capable of that, we can try rebuilding something. If not, I'm okay with maintaining distance. I'll be unavailable for the next several weeks due to work commitments. I'll reach out when I have time. I sent the message and then put my phone in a drawer, not wanting to see the immediate reactions. Whether they'd respond with genuine self-reflection or with defensiveness, and blame-shifting would tell me everything I needed to know about whether these relationships were worth salvaging. Over the next 3 weeks, I deployed to another location for training exercises and advanced coursework. My phone stayed mostly off, checked only occasionally for official communications. The messages from my family continued, but I didn't read them in detail. Just enough to see that Patricia was apparently furious about my disrespectful message, that my father wanted to have a conversation to clear the air, and that Andrea was still somehow making this about herself. But there was one message that caught my attention, sent 2 weeks after my initial response. It was from my father, and unlike his previous messages, this one was longer and more thoughtful. Riley, I've read your message about 50 times now, and each time I read it, I'm more ashamed of myself. You're right about everything. I've spent your entire life being a passive observer to Patricia's favoritism instead of being an actual father to you. I've missed or ignored every important moment of your military career. I've made assumptions about your life instead of asking questions. I've let you down in virtually every way a parent can let a child down. I can't undo the past 20 years. I can't get back the commissioning ceremony I missed, or the promotions I didn't celebrate, or the deployments I didn't support you through. I can't fix the damage caused by treating you as less important than Andrea for your entire childhood. But I want you to know that I see it now. I see how badly I've failed you, and I'm ashamed. Patricia and I have been in counseling since the wedding. Not because of the embarrassment, though that was certainly a catalyst, but because what happened at Andrea's wedding forced me to confront truths I'd been avoiding about our marriage and our family dynamics. Patricia has never accepted you as truly her daughter. She's always resented that you existed as evidence of my life before her. She systematically excluded you and favored Andrea, and I've allowed it because confronting it was uncomfortable and might have threatened my marriage. I chose my comfort over your well-being. That's the truth I've had to face, and it's devastating to acknowledge. You deserved a father who protected you and prioritized you and celebrated your achievements. You got a father who was too weak and too selfish to do any of those things. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm just asking for the chance to do better going forward if you're willing to give me that chance. And if you're not willing, if the damage is too deep and the trust is too broken, I understand that too. You don't owe me anything. Riley, you've become an incredible person despite me, not because of me, and I'm so proud of you even though I have no right to that pride. Whatever you decide about our relationship, I want you to know you were never the embarrassment. You were never the problem. The problem was always that I was too blind and too cowardly to see what an extraordinary daughter I had and to give you the support and recognition you deserved. I love you, Riley. I'm sorry it's taken me this long to say it clearly and mean it fully. Dad, I read the message 3 times, looking for manipulation or self-serving elements, searching for the ways he might be making his own failures somehow my responsibility to fix. But the message seemed genuinely accountable in ways my father had never been before. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't blaming me for not forcing him to pay attention. He wasn't centering his own feelings of victimhood. He was just acknowledging the truth. It didn't fix anything. One message couldn't undo 2 decades of neglect and dismissal. But it was more than I'd expected from him. And it suggested maybe, there was a possibility of building something different going forward. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time to process, to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with my father, if any, to determine whether I believed he was actually capable of sustained change versus momentary guilt-driven promises. But for the first time in my entire life, I felt like my father might actually be seeing me clearly, not as an obligation or an afterthought or a source of embarrassment, but as his daughter who deserved better and who'd built something extraordinary despite not getting it. Whether that clarity would last remained to be seen. but it was a start. Now keep watching, because what happened over the next 6 months tested whether my father's words were genuine or just another disappointment waiting to happen. I waited 3 days before responding to my father's message. 3 days of thinking carefully about what I wanted, what I needed, what I was willing to risk emotionally by giving him another chance. 3 days of talking it through with my therapist at the on-base counseling center. Yes, even successful military officers need mental health support, and I'd learned years ago that processing family trauma with a professional was healthier than letting it fester. My response was measured and clear. Dad, thank you for your message. I appreciate the accountability and honesty in it. You're right that one message doesn't fix 20 years of hurt, but it's more than I've gotten from you before, and I acknowledge that. I'm willing to try rebuilding a relationship with you, but it needs to be on terms that protect me from further disappointment. That means I need to see sustained change over time, not just momentary guilt-driven promises. Words are easy. Consistent actions over months and years are what actually matter. Need you to recognize that Patricia's behavior toward me throughout my childhood was abusive. Emotional neglect and systematic exclusion are forms of abuse, even if they don't leave physical marks. Your counseling should address that reality, not soften it into favoritism or personality differences. I need you to understand that I'm not responsible for managing Patricia's feelings about being embarrassed at the wedding. Her embarrassment is the natural consequence of her own choices and assumptions. She needs to address that in her own therapy, not make it my problem to fix. I need our relationship to be based on genuine engagement with my actual life, not on you trying to claim credit for my success or treating me as impressive now that my rank and career have become publicly known. You should have valued me when I was an enlisted sailor with no rank. The fact that you only see my worth now that I'm a lieutenant commander is something you need to reckon with. If you can meet those terms and demonstrate through sustained behavior that you've actually changed, then yes, I'm willing to try. But I'm not going to accommodate your guilt or make this process easier for you at the expense of my own well-being. You failed me consistently for 20 years. Earning back trust will take time and effort. Riley. His response came within an hour. All of your terms are fair and reasonable. I'll meet them. I promise you, Riley, I'm going to do better. I'm going to be the father I should have been all along. Promises are easy, I thought. We'd see if he could actually deliver. Over the next 6 months, my father did something I'd never expected. He actually followed through. He called every Sunday at a scheduled time that worked with my duty schedule. And when I couldn't talk because I was deployed or in training, he left thoughtful voicemails asking specific questions about my work, within appropriate security boundaries, and my life. He sent care packages during my deployments, not elaborate or expensive, just thoughtful items that showed he'd listened when I mentioned things I needed or missed. He attended my promotion ceremony when I was selected for commander, 05 rank, equivalent to lieutenant colonel at just 30 years old. He flew across the country on his own dime, sat through the formal ceremony with visible pride, and didn't make it about him or his belated recognition of my achievements. He just celebrated me. He asked questions about my work and actually listened to the answers. He learned military rank structures so he understood what my promotions meant. He read articles about naval intelligence so he could better understand my career field. He did the work of actually knowing me instead of just making assumptions about who I was. Most importantly, he stopped defending Patricia. When she made dismissive comments about my career in his presence, he corrected her. When she tried to blame me for the embarrassment at Andrea's wedding, he shut it down. When she expected him to pressure me into family events I didn't want to attend, he told her I was an adult who made my own decisions and that she needed to respect that. They ultimately divorced 18 months after Andrea's wedding. According to my father, the counseling had made it clear that Patricia was incapable of genuine self-reflection or change, that she deeply resented both me and my father for the wedding embarrassment, and that she'd never be able to build a healthy relationship with me. My father chose me over preserving his marriage to her, which was more than he'd ever done before. I'm not going to pretend that divorce made everything perfect between us. We were still rebuilding trust that had been shattered over decades. There were still moments when old patterns surfaced and had to be addressed. There were still conversations where I had to remind him that I wasn't responsible for managing his feelings of guilt about his past failures. But slowly, Carefully, we built something that resembled an actual parent-child relationship. Not the relationship we would have had if he'd been present and supportive from the beginning, but a relationship that acknowledged the past while trying to build something better for the future. Patricia, predictably, blamed me for the divorce. I heard through relatives that she told anyone who would listen that I'd deliberately humiliated her at Andrea's wedding, that I'd poisoned my father against her, that I was a vindictive person who'd destroyed her family. I didn't bother responding to any of it. People who knew me understood the truth. People who believed Patricia's narrative weren't people whose opinions mattered to me. Andrea and I remained distant. She'd never apologized for the entitlement she'd displayed after the wedding, or for the years of going along with Patricia's favoritism. We were cordial at necessary family events, but we weren't close and probably never would be. She'd benefited too much from the dynamic that had hurt me to want to examine it critically, and I wasn't interested in forcing a relationship with someone who couldn't acknowledge their role in that dynamic. But the extended family shifted in interesting ways. Relatives who'd barely acknowledged my existence started treating me with respect and interest. Some of it was performative, suddenly caring about my career, because I'd achieved a high rank and had dramatic stories they could tell their friends. But some of it seemed genuine, particularly from a few cousins who reached out to apologize for years of dismissing me and who made real efforts to build adult relationships. I accepted the genuine apologies and ignored the performative interest. I'd learned to recognize the difference, and I was done expending energy on people who only valued me when it benefited them somehow. 2 years after Andrea's wedding, 2 years after Commander Chen walked into that ballroom and extracted me for classified operations, I was promoted to commander and selected for a prestigious assignment at the Pentagon. It was a career milestone that represented over a decade of exceptional service and advancement, and it positioned me for potential promotion to Captain 06 within the next few years if my performance continued at the same level. My father attended the ceremony at the Pentagon, along with my grandmother Alice and a few close military friends. There was no Patricia, no Andrea, no extended family who'd spent years dismissing me. Just people who actually valued me and had supported me genuinely. After the ceremony, my father pulled me aside for a private conversation. "Riley, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm so proud of you. Not just because of your rank or your achievements, but because of who you are as a person. You're strong and resilient, and you built something extraordinary despite getting no support from the people who should have given it to you. You're better than I deserved as a daughter, and I'm grateful every day that you've given me the chance to try to be better as a father." "Thanks, Dad," I said, and I meant it. "I appreciate you showing up consistently for the past 2 years. That's mattered more than words ever could. I'm going to keep showing up," he promised. "For the rest of my life, however long that is, I'm going to keep showing up for you." And remarkably, he did. Over the years that followed, he became the father I'd always needed. Present, supportive, genuinely engaged with my life. Proud of me not because of my rank, but because of who I was as a person. It didn't erase the pain of the first 28 years of my life, but it proved that people could actually change if they truly committed to doing the work. As for that wedding where Commander Chen walked in and changed everything, it became family legend, though different people told the story different ways. In Patricia's version, I deliberately orchestrated the drama to humiliate her. In reality, I'd simply been doing my job and responding to an urgent operational tasking. The fact that it happened at a wedding where I was being treated as an embarrassment was just cosmic timing. But here's what I learned from that experience, and from the years that followed. Your worth isn't determined by people who can't see it. Your accomplishments matter even if your family doesn't celebrate them. Your success is valid, even if it happens despite lack of support, rather than because of abundant support. And sometimes the best thing you can do is build a life so meaningful and purposeful that other people's opinions become irrelevant to your sense of self-worth. That helicopter extraction from Andrea's wedding didn't change who I was. I was already Lieutenant Commander Hayes, already accomplished, already valuable, already living a life of purpose. What it changed was my family's awareness of who I'd been all along, and their awareness, or lack of awareness, had never been what determined my worth. I'd spent 11 years building a career I was proud of. I'd served in combat zones and classified operations. I'd briefed admirals and contributed to national security. I'd earned every promotion through merit and dedication. I'd become someone whose expertise was valued enough to justify helicopter extraction from family events. Patricia could hide me behind flower arrangements, but she couldn't hide the truth of who I'd become. My father could miss my achievements for years, but that didn't make those achievements less real or less important. Andrea could be annoyed that I'd overshadowed her wedding, but my operational tasking wasn't about her. Special day, it was about work that actually mattered to something bigger than one person's. Celebration. And that's ultimately the lesson I want to leave with anyone watching this. Don't wait for your family to recognize your value. Don't diminish your achievements because people who should celebrate them don't. Don't let anyone make you feel like an embarrassment when you're actually someone worth celebrating. Build your life on your own terms. Find purpose that matters to you. Surround yourself with people who value you genuinely. And if your family eventually realizes they underestimated you, that's their journey to take, not your responsibility to manage. 5 years after that wedding, I'm Captain Hayes now, 06 rank, commanding my own unit, doing work I'm passionate about, living a life I'm proud of. My father is consistently present and supportive. My grandmother is still my biggest cheerleader. The military family I've built values me completely. Patricia still thinks I deliberately humiliated her. Andrea still occasionally complains that I ruined her wedding. Various relatives still don't really understand what I do or why it matters, and I genuinely don't care. Their opinions don't define me. Their awareness doesn't validate me. Their approval doesn't complete me. I'm Captain Riley Hayes, United States Navy. I've served my country for 16 years. I've contributed to operations that kept people safe, even though most Americans will never know those operations happened. I've mentored junior officers and helped them build their own successful careers. I've lived a life of purpose and meaning and service. That's who I am. That's what matters. And no one, not Patricia, not my father during those years of neglect, not Andrea, not anyone, can take that away from me or diminish it by choosing not to see it. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you for watching. Drop a comment and let me know. Have you ever been underestimated by family who didn't bother to really know you? How did you handle it? What would you say to someone currently going through similar situations? And remember, you don't need your family's permission to be extraordinary. You don't need their recognition to validate your achievements. You don't need their approval to build a life you're proud of. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just living so well, achieving so much and becoming so grounded in your own worth that their opinions become background noise you barely notice. Build something great. Become someone extraordinary. And when helicopters land to retrieve you from weddings because your expertise is urgently needed, smile politely, do your job, and let other people deal with their own embarrassment about underestimating you. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more stories about building success on your own terms, setting boundaries with toxic family dynamics, and refusing to let anyone make you feel small when you're actually remarkable. You're stronger than they told you. You're more capable than they acknowledged. And you're going to be more than fine. You're going to be extraordinary.